go ahead and start. So basically, okay, tonight we're gonna be discussing mass incarceration tonight. I got brother Darius here. He's been in the game a long time. He's campaigning for the black community to make sure we getting the rights we deserve. Make sure we got everything abreast of what's going on in the political world. They're trying to do a lot of things underhandedly. My brother here gonna discuss our rights. A lot of people don't know their rights. A lot of people, brothers have, got caught up in the game early with felonies and whatnot. And he's going to discuss the 13th Amendment and the little clause they have in there called incarceration, a way to another legally enslave our people. So without further ado, I'm going to give it to Brother Darius. Take it away, my brother.
Thank you for having me on, Brother Sean.
I appreciate you.
I want to get into this tonight. But before I just really start breaking, give an overview of how we are, why we are where we are, and how what we call this mass incarceration that today, such as gentrification. First of all, I think to understand this madness that we're in, a lot of us as African-American people, we tend to look at this matter from maybe closed eyes, but also the eyes of the media, because, the mainstream media is very, very indoctrinated. If you just watch the things that come on through the mass media, it indoctrinates our minds into falsehoods, which we really don't understand. So first of all, how did we get to this era of what we call mass incarceration? What is mass incarceration? And I do believe that we can start tracing it back through the lens of the civil rights and the protest eras. Starting back with the civil rights era, and this has been well documented in a book that I recommend everybody read if they're not up on it. Is called The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness by a former Stanford law professor by the name of Michelle Alexander. Michelle Alexander, she was working for the ACLU back in the early 90s, the mid 90s. And at that time, most of you probably remember there was a scandal in the Oakland Police Department called the Ryder Scandal, where several Oakland police officers were accused of planting drugs on individuals, beating them up. And when Michelle was working for the ACLU, one of the things, she had young men coming in and telling her, look, these people, they're planting drugs on us, they're doing all these things, and basically nobody believed them. And then Michelle, she said, I started to hear the same story, so let me just start examining what's going on. And sure enough, one of the Oakland police recruits, he was a white young man, he was a rookie. He saw things that were going on, and he decided to blow the whistle on what was happening. And so from that standpoint, the Ryder's case was filed. And to this day, even though the court has ruled against the Oakland Police Department in the Ryder scandal, the reforms almost 15, 20 years later have not come to fruition. We have just seated in Oakland a citizens police review board that has some teeth. One of my colleagues, my brother, community organizer, great man by the name of John Jones, he was honored by Rob Bonta last year as one of the organizers of the year. He's been called a dynamo for justice. He was very instrumental in setting up that police review panel and getting impacted persons a seat on that panel. So I just give it up for my brother, John Jones, who's currently a life coach for an organization in Oakland called Communities United for Youth Restorative Justice. So with that said, how can we start tracing the roots of mass incarceration? Well, what we do know is that these cries started to happen right after the 1967 riots in Detroit, the riot in Watts. And what started to happen was that, they came up with this plan to start associating, African Americans with, insidious things. The Black Panthers Party, they were demonized. They were considered the number one threat to national security, when that was just a blatant lie. They were no more a threat to national security than, a couple of homeboys hanging around on the corner. If a matter of fact, the Ku Klux Klan was a bigger threat to national security, and they're still the biggest threat to national security ever known. But we were labeled. With that said, they came up with a way to associate African Americans with crime. So during the Reagan administration, and even before that, Nixon declared this undue war on the African American population, and it was actually based upon a report on the Negro family. It was called the Mohanian Report, and he was a man who wrote a report on the African American family, and he literally said the African American family is failing, and that was a lie. And what happened is that they started to change direction on things and policies and stuff to just disempower some of the gains that we had won, short-lived gains that we had won during the 60s era. And one way to do that is take away our voting rights. And so one of the things that began to happen during the late 60s and early 70s, they began to demonize most of our civil rights workers, criminalize them. And later on, as we got into the late 80s, here comes this war on drugs. Crack cocaine began to hit our communities. Now, what was the impact of that? Well, first of all, in looking at mass incarceration, and I'm just going to give you some numbers. Okay, keep in mind that in America, the Black population only makes up 13% of the population. Yet from throughout the 90s, when when the population, the prison population was at an all-time high, just keep in mind, African Americans counted 2.3 million, or 34% of the total 6.8 million correctional population. Astronomical numbers, right? African Americans are incarcerated more than 5 times the rate of whites. The imprisonment rate for African American women is twice that of white women. Nationwide, African American children represent 32% of children who are arrested, 42% of children who are detained, and 52% of children whose cases are judicially waived to criminal court. So what we see is that these big disparities, and I look at this amongst the Hispanic population. Though African Americans and Hispanics make up approximately 32% of the U.S. population, they comprise 56% of all incarcerated people in 2015. So what does all this mean? It has collateral consequences to it. Collateral consequences. And what do I mean by collateral consequences? Well, the collateral damage is seen through everything. It's seen through housing. There's restrictions on housing. There's over 6,000 restrictions in Alameda County, in the state of California alone for employment. There are restrictions on licensing. If you have a felony, to get professional licensing. Like, take for instance, if a woman has a conviction and she aspires to be, let's say, go into cosmetology, she's restricted from doing so. Her license, she can't get a license. She has to go through a tedious process of getting approved to get a license just to do hair, nails, feet, and all the other things. Just think about that. Most recently, I found out in Alameda County and throughout the state of California, if a woman has a felony conviction and she's trying to get her child into Head Start, they will not pay for that because of the felony conviction. So just think about what that does. If I've already been to prison, but I don't want my children to end up in prison, so I get them in trying to get them enrolled into a Head Start program and trying to get that Head Start program funded, the dollars and cents that come down to most people without a felony record, then they're they can't do that. So those are collateral consequences. And so what do we know? What do we know? Well, let's talk about the prison system in the first place. Most people think that slavery ended with the Emancipation Proclamation. And in some instances, it did. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery. However, the 13th Amendment, this is what it says: neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So what this says is that slavery is basically illegal, with the exception if you have been convicted of a crime, then you are locked up in prison as a form of servitude. And it shows in everything that prison is all about, the prison labor, how they use prison labor. In California, the highest wage that you could make, let's say if you're working in what's called the prison industry. California has prison industry, which is known as PIA, and a lot of times they do work for private corporations. So let's say AT&T, there's businesses going on right now in the state of California, contracts with AT&T to do some of their work. Prisoners may be answering phones, doing telemarketing, doing whatever at 90 cents an hour. Well, that same individual, if he gets out of prison, they apply for a job at AT&T, AT&T won't even hire him. So that's a disparity right there. You know, prison labor, slavery is all synonymous. Now, I want to jump a little bit to what Jim Crow is, because I actually referenced Michelle Alexander, the author of The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness. And what do we know about Jim Crow? Well, we know that after slavery was actually abolished, or never abolished in America, we were just let go without any property or anything like that, no land, no nothing. We were just kicked out with nowhere to go. They said, here, make it on your own. Jim Crow came up. What is Jim Crow? Well, it was this man by the name of Thomas Dartmouth Rice, a white man. And he was born in New York City in about 1808, they say. And he devoted himself to theater in his 20s. And in the early 1830s, he began performing the act that would make him famous. He painted his face black. He did a song and dance. He claimed were inspired by a slave that he saw. The act was called Jump Jim Crow. Later on, Jim Crow began to be recognized with basically slaves that were let go and certain laws that were passed. So what is Jim Crow today? How does that affect people's ability to actually come back into society after they have been incarcerated? Now, let's just stop for a moment, because I don't know, have my listeners got a chance to see the Netflix documentary, The 13th. If you haven't seen it, I would just really suggest that you do so, because it breaks down the 13th Amendment and Jim Crow very eloquently. African Americans, at some point during the 80s and 90s, we led the charge for mass incarceration. We've seen all these things on the periphery going on in our communities. All of a sudden, our communities were infested with drugs, guns, people walking around like zombies as the impact. But what we don't really realize is during that same period, about the mid-70s, especially here in Oakland, and it can be traced throughout all the nation, a lot of jobs began to disappear. And these were jobs that traditionally were held by men. Those jobs tended to disappear, and a lot of the jobs that were traditionally held by women, they kind of held steady. So when the jobs began to disappear, another product comes into our communities. Men are supporting their families through whatever means are necessary. Right or wrong, we could debate it, but they were taking care of their household in the way that they thought that they had to do. This contributed to basic laws that basically were set up to enslave and entrap African Americans. Now, just let me tell you, it's been documented that more people were selling, white cats were selling massive amounts of drugs and weight. If you went to the UC Berkeley campus and on a Friday night and passed by the frat row, you would see these wild parties going on, cocaine parties. There was more drugs going on in those communities than it actually was going on in our communities. But yet our community was demonized through the media every night, and things showed up. So what did we end up with? We ended up with tough on crime laws, 3 strikes you're out, mandatory minimums in the feds that lock people away for life for the same amount of crack cocaine as a person had for powder cocaine. They made crack cocaine more dangerous in the eyes of the public than it was powder cocaine, but you can't have crack unless you have the powder. So it seemed to me that the powder should have had the mandatory minimums. So with that said, what are the collateral consequences? Now I'm going to talk about some of the things that have really, really happened in the last few years. Maybe about 2011 in California, the California prison system became so overcrowded that people filed lawsuits pertaining to mental health, the denial of mental health access, and also the denial of basic health care. Years of fighting brought it to the United States Supreme Court. And in 2011, the United States Supreme Court said, California had to empty their prison population. So instead of outright emptying the prison population, letting non-violent, non-serious felons go, they came up with a bill that was called AB 109, which was called prison realignment. And what it did was it shifted state prisoners with non-violent, non-serious felons away from the state prison system and put it in the hands of the county sheriff. So now you have people that would have been bound for state prison, they're in the county jail system. So basically, while the prison population has fallen significantly in California and is held steady in the county jails, we still have all these tough crime laws. Fast forward, as the nation began to grapple with the overspending on prisons, they were bankrupting themselves, so they had to forestall it in finding a different way. So now everybody jumped on the bandwagon of prison reform. California, we came up with a voter initiative in 2015, and it was called Proposition 47. This was kind of like a godsend for some people. Others say they kind of have their thoughts about it, but what Proposition 47 did was it took 7 felonies and they reduced them to misdemeanors. Those felonies were shoplifting, where the value of property stolen does not exceed $950. Grand theft, where the value of the stolen property does not exceed $950. Receiving stolen property, where the value of the property does not exceed $950. Forgery, where the value of the forged check, bond, or bill does not exceed $950. Fraud, with the value of fraudulent check, draft, or order does not exceed $950. And then lastly, writing a bad check where the value of the check does not exceed $950. And then the last thing was personal use of illegal drugs were reduced to a misdemeanor. Now, all of these, they are kind of like, when you talk about the African-American population, most of us right now, we weren't incarcerated for use. Most of our people were incarcerated for sales. The same amount of drugs that someone may have gotten a possession for, we were incarcerated at a higher rate for sales, and that's just the thing. So all those felonies were reduced to misdemeanors. And so what does this do? It gives a person an opportunity, if they fall under that, to have their records clear of those felonies. And what does it mean? it does make a difference in some instances if you have a felony versus a misdemeanor. Because if you have a misdemeanor, that means that you can at least get a guard card at some point and get a pretty I would say not a decent wage, but a pretty good job to where you can support yourself doing security guard work by not having a felony. It makes a difference. But I also want to point this out too. When you talk about black men with felonies versus misdemeanors, keep this in mind, that a African-American man who has never been to prison or never has a felony record, a white individual with a felony record has a better chance of getting a job than an African-American man who has never been to prison in his life. So that's just the reality of the racist country that we're still living in. So how can we begin to shape this? Well, it's going to be tough. But I think that if we know what our rights are, it helps to give us a foothold, at least a foothold in trying to get some things back. And we can get it back through voting. California is one of the few states that will give you back your voting rights after you get off of parole or probation. So who's eligible to vote in California? Well, if you're not currently found mentally incompetent to vote, right, you can vote. Now, persons with a criminal history can register to vote if they're in a county jail. If you're in a county jail serving a sentence on a misdemeanor, you can vote while you're in the county jail. Because jail time is a condition of probation, misdemeanor or felony. So if you're serving a felony sentence or awaiting trial in county jail, you can vote. You can vote once you release from supervision, parole or probation, you can vote in California. So I urge anyone with a felony record who's been to prison, they're no longer on probation or on parole, in this next election cycle, get out and vote. Register to vote. Locally, we can do a lot of damage voting more than we can, I would say, at the federal level. Just think about it. Think about who's sitting as our mayor right now of the city of Oakland. Think about it. When she was elected, just think if most of our brothers and sisters with felony records knew that they can vote, that may have turned the tide in the election. So as a formerly incarcerated individual coming out of state prison or federal prison, once you get off parole, you can vote. Very significant. So one of the other ways that we can get our rights back, and this very minimal, right, is through other means of legislation. And one of the things is called, you can get an outright pardon or a certificate of rehabilitation. But that, my friend, it does not restore all of your rights. I had a conversation with a brother not too long ago, and he was of the thinking that once he was off probation or parole, then he can get his gun rights restored. Well, in California, even if you get a certificate of rehabilitation, which I am going to talk about in a minute, or you get a pardon in California, you still are going to have a hard time getting your voting rights back. So I'm going to run down a little statistics. So I got time to run down some statistics about voting. What I want to do is run down some statistics about voting and what you need to know. Basically, there are different classifications in United States of America, and for restoration of voting rights for people who are ex-felons. And this varies across the United States. So if we look at the unrestricted rights, there's 2 states, Maine and Vermont, are the only states with unrestricted voting rights for people who are felons. Both states allow the person to vote during incarceration via absentee ballot and after the terms of their conviction. The next classification is that their rights are restored after they are released. In 14 states and the District of Columbia, disenfranchisement, that means the right to vote, ends after incarceration is complete. So you have the District of Columbia, Hawaii, Illinois, Maryland, Massachusetts, Michigan, Montana, New Hampshire, North Dakota, Ohio, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, and Utah. And what this basically means is that once a person gets out of prison in those states, even if they are on parole, they get their right back to vote. Now, another classification is that your rights are restored to vote and it ends after parole. Now, keep in mind the states that I just named that you get your voting rights restored after you're released from prison, even though you're on parole. I named Montana, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, North Dakota, Oregon, Pennsylvania, and Rhode Island, right? In 4 states, your rights end after incarceration and parole is complete, and that's California, Colorado, Connecticut, and New York. So you see, even in the great liberal state of California, we still lag behind other states in getting your rights restored. That's just a few. So now I want to take it a step further because I know my listeners out there, Sean's listeners, are going to have a lot of questions. So how can I get the restoration of my civil rights back, right? Well, in California, the California Constitution disqualifies from office, right? Anyone convicted of buying a vote, authorizing laws disqualifying the public for any convicted offense of bribery. Now, that doesn't too much apply to some of us because most of us aren't elected officials. But what about firearms? A person convicted of a firearm in any jurisdiction or of a misdemeanor in California, an offense involving the violent use of a firearm, cannot own, purchase, receive, possess, or exercise physical custody or control over a firearm. Now, this is very important because a lot of us right now, we're in survival mode. Everybody's carrying guns. Some of us want to go to the range and start preparing for what's ahead of us, but I would suggest that you be very careful because if you are a convicted felon and you get caught with a possession of a firearm, even at a firing range, if you already got 2 strikes, that could be a 3rd strike and you could end up going to prison for a very long time. And that really seems like, you know, the tip of the iceberg. So when you look at how they incarcerated us, keep in mind those numbers that I said about incarceration, right? There's something sinister in that. Is this a way to disarm us legally? Was that a way to disarm us legally? Keep in mind, right? The amount of, remember, we only make up 13% of the American population, right? But yet during this massive move of mass incarceration, this war on drugs, we made up over 42% of the prison population in America. And in California, you don't get to get your gun rights back. So there are some ways that you can get some of your rights restored. And one of the ways I want to talk about is through what's called the certificate of rehabilitation. What is the certificate of rehabilitation? Well, the certificate of rehabilitation, it restores your civil rights that have been lost, but it does not seal or expunge the record of the conviction. And basically, what it does, the right to possess a firearm is restored upon a full and unconditional pardon based upon the certificate of rehabilitation, except when the underlying offense involved the use of a dangerous weapon. So once again, it's a loophole for us, right? A direct pardon only restores firearms rights if specified. And the same exception for dangerous weapon offenses applies also to a direct pardon. So once again, the fact that most of us have been convicted and we've been charged with dangerous weapon offenses, even though most of the time it was an act of self-defense, we went to prison for it, we were convicted of it. Very few of us, even with getting our full rights restored under the certificate of rehabilitation and a full pardon, will legally have your rights restored. Once again, disarming. How did these policies come about? They looked to what was going on, how we became empowered with the Black Panther Party and other groups. And they saw a way to take advantage of it, incarcerate us, strip us of our rights, strip us of everything that we have. You're always paying. Your firearm rights are gone. Who's eligible for a certificate of rehabilitation? Well, the eligibility in California, if a resident has been convicted of any state law, that's a felony, they may apply to the Superior Court of the county in which they live in. And how long does it take? Well, you need to be in California continuously after you have gotten off parole for about 5 years, 4 or 5 years. And then it's going to take an additional 4 years after you have completed that time. So you're looking at maybe about 9 years with an extremely clean record. They do everything from check your work history to your credit, anything that could disqualify you. And you can be represented in a court of law by an attorney once you apply for that certificate of rehabilitation. So I say that those of us who are eligible to apply for it, because there's a whole lot of us that might not have those gun offenses that can get our gun rights restored. Now, where else are we going with this? I would say it looks different, but the same old tricks with just a different face on it. We're all familiar with how they systematically removed the native people from the land, put them on reservations. Today, we're faced with gentrification. If you go to places in Cocoa County like Richmond, Alameda County, West Oakland, San Francisco, Hunters Point, the Fillmore, you'll see this wave of gentrification. But what we have not linked to gentrification is mass incarceration. Think about it. When our brothers began to go off to prison, the income that they had coming in, rightly or wrongly, was lost. And as a result, a lot of people who had been left homes in West Oakland and other places, they could no longer afford to pay property taxes on it, loss of income, woman out there struggling. A lot of it was a result of mass incarceration. And I say this because I've talked to brothers and sisters throughout the country. You know, my work as a community organizer, it has put me in touch with people from Chicago to Michigan, all over, and they all tell the same story of how their communities have become overwhelmingly gentrified. And a lot of it were communities where African Americans resided, but when people start disappearing off the streets due to mass incarceration, they begin to lose their home. They began to lose property. If you've never seen this documentary, I would suggest that you might want to see it. It's called The Throwaways, and it's a brother. He documents his time coming out of New York State prison system, trying to get back into a better way of life. And one of the things that he does is he goes through certain neighborhoods and he documents how the neighborhoods were impacted by mass incarceration. So this is a big and long subject, and we can sit down. A lot of people are critical of our own people because we become stigmatized too. You know, I've heard people say, well, weren't we the cause of our own problems? Weren't we this or weren't we that? Well, it's easy to sit down and criticize people if you've never been in that situation. Just think about it. When during the 80s, for most of you who are old enough to remember, people could walk to their places of employment in East Oakland. They had factories. In West Oakland, they had factories. All these things began to disappear. And in the wake of it, they brought in a product that, you know, supplemented people's income, and that was the case. So I would say that if you know your rights, if you know how this thing operates, if you know how this beast that we're living under right now is moving, there's things that we can do, little steps. That's voting. California, get your voting rights back. If you're off parole out there, get your voting rights back. Go register to vote because you can vote. Another thing, if you're under Proposition 47 and you think you might qualify for one of these record removals, on September the 16th, there's going to be an event at the St. Columba Church located on the North Oakland Berkeley line. The address is 1121 64th Street. They're going to be having a festival, and it's going to be going on from 12 o'clock to 7 p.m. But it's a coalition in Alameda County, which I'm a part of. It's called the Justice Reinvestment Coalition. We sponsor Proposition 47 reclassification clinics. At that festival is going to be a reclassification clinic going on from 2 to 5. There will be someone there to give you a live scan, give you a printout, and tell you how to go about getting some of those felonies reduced to misdemeanors. Another place where you can go is called record expungement. The Alameda County is called the Alameda County Clean Slate Clinics. And this is run in partnership with a law firm called the East Bay Community Law Center. And on Tuesdays from 2 to 4 out in Dublin, they do walk-in clinics. And that's at the Dublin courthouse. And that's located right across the street from the Santa Rita jail. I'll say no more about that. But on Thursdays from 9 o'clock to 11 a.m., the Public Defender's Office, which is located at 545 4th Street in Oakland, they also do clean slate, and you can go there if you have anything you want to talk about getting your record clean. And what can this do? Well, it can help with employment denials due to criminal background. It could also go to dismissal of a conviction, outright expungement, felony reduction, which I said under Proposition 47 release, early termination of probation. This can help with certificate of rehabilitation. If you're a juvenile, these walk-in clinics could help with juvenile record sealing, the sealing of arrest record, and also factual innocence. errors in criminal background reports, and much more. So I encourage you to take note of this and get down there and help yourself to get back into, to get a semblance of power back. Because right now, with this beast that we're fighting, this beast that we're up against, we as African Americans and Black population, we need to lasso and wrestle some individual power. And I know that for some people, we have become down on voting, but I say this: you could measure the value of something by how much effort is involved in taking that away from you. If voting did not have any power, or was not significant, then why would there be so much effort going on to keep you from voting? That's how you know how valuable voting is. So once again, get those voting rights restored. Once they're restored, then we can move other places. You get your voting rights restored, you can lobby for certain things, and that's a way to regain and reveal power. So I will open this up to some questions if people have questions.
Darius.
Yes,
Darius,
sir.
how you doing? It's CJ.
Yes.
Yeah, I'm not really feeling real great. I had a biopsy today. Yeah, trying to do what the average Black man is not doing, going to the hospital, trying to get myself checked out, you know.
All right.
Yes, sir. But I had one question for you. It is about being able to leave the country with a felony. Do you know anything about that?
Oh, yes. You can. Yes, you can.
I can get a passport. I can get a passport with a felony.
Yes. Yes. Got my passport. Even though I have a felony, I have a passport. And I would say, if you have a passport, it would be very wise. I mean, if you have a felony, it would be very wise to get a passport. The way things are going now, we may have to make a mass exodus. So I would encourage you to get your passport. Yes, you can.
Exactly. All right. Thank you, man.
You're welcome.
All right. Anybody else? Let me see. Okay, somebody, Natasha had to raise her hand. Okay, Natasha.
Okay, hi. And thank you for speaking on this subject. I think this is a very important subject because I know there's probably everybody on this this group knows somebody in prison or been to prison. But my question is, when you were speaking on when they are incarcerated for something that they could still vote, I just had a smaller question. What if they have been sentenced already, but they filed for an appeal, and so they're still, fighting the case, same case?
Okay. This is what was just recognized in California. If a person is in the county jail and they haven't been sentenced to a felony as of yet, they can vote. But if you've been already sentenced to state prison, even though you're fighting your appeal, right, you can't vote. However, there is some legislation that is being looked at. I did reference those few states. There were a few states where you can actually vote while you're incarcerated, and that was, I believe, Maine.
Maine.
Yes.
And something else.
Maine and Vermont. It's
Vermont.
Those are the two states. Yeah.
So can you be in Maine and Vermont in jail or in prison?
Yes.
And being able to vote?
And being able to vote. They allow you to vote.
Wow, that's interesting. Okay, awesome. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. But I would encourage anybody who you know that even if they're not, in jail right now, but they have that felony on their record and they think they can't vote, encourage them to get out and register to vote, because it makes a difference.
Okay, I got a question for you, Darius. I was told that they didn't even have a way to find out if you had you couldn't vote or not. I heard there was nothing set up to where they know for sure that you didn't have voting rights. What do you think about that?
Can you repeat that again?
I was told that they had no way of telling if you had voting rights or not if you went to the polls and voted. So I just want to know if you know anything about that.
Well, what happens is that you have to file for registration, and you bring that registration certificate with you that you have been registered to vote. Now, once you file for that registration, it starts to ask you certain questions, right? One of the questions is ask you, have you ever been convicted of a felony? And so if you have been convicted of a felony, and then it asks whether you're on probation or you're on parole. And if you say no, then it could come back that in what they call like voter fraud, right? So, and what happens in close elections, whether it's the state or local or county elections, the people who are set up, the voting commissions, they normally go by and they check the voter rolls based upon your social security number and what have you, and they can determine at that time whether you're on probation or on parole. Parole in particular, because if you're on probation, you can vote. And so what does this mean? Just also know too, I didn't touch on this, but because of felony convictions, you are excluded from like jury pools too. And so you can't serve on a jury. So that means that a lot of times a person going up more times than not, we're not being tried by a jury of your peers. There was a bill that was brought into the state of California that sought to give persons convicted of felonies a chance to serve on juries. That bill right now has not made it anywhere. It's what you call, it's in suspense. So it's just hanging there. It's going to be a fight. As long as I'm in the fight, I'll continue to fight for that, because a felony conviction should not, restrict anybody from serving on a jury.
Okay, we got another question. Marshall got his hand up. All right, hang on, Marsh. All right, go ahead, Marsh.
Hey, Brother Darius, how are you, man?
Hey, I'm doing okay.
Good, my brother. I got a strange situation.
Mm-hmm.
After going out and doing everything that's supposed to be done, I purchased a weapon for my own protection, and then a shotgun and so forth. But I came back and I went to purchase a handgun. I was turned down from the state check, I couldn't understand it, seeing how I got one prior. So I went up to Sacramento to the bureau up there where our Attorney General's offices are, and found out that the public cannot go in and speak to anyone there about such cases, and you must nor can you call them, and you have to go online to do things. And then after you go and have another set of fingerprints done, and they have everything in the world on you because of the Army, jobs, all of these things that I've done in these last 60 plus years, they came back with me, wrote me a letter and said, 51 years ago, you were arrested and released because you had a joint of marijuana, and that's why we stopped you. It seems to me that some statute ran out from 51 years ago. Do you know anything about that?
Okay. So you were basically charged that long ago with felony possession of marijuana. Is that correct?
It was not felony possession at the time, no.
What was it?
I was a minor in possession, and they took me in. My father came and got me out, and he told me later that everything had been wiped off the books, but apparently not. And they did not even in the report from the state. It did not indicate felony at all on the paper.
Okay, so did you get the information that I just put out to you? It would seem to me that, and these sometimes the statutes or whatever, they tend to overlap and stuff. So basically, if you were a minor and you were caught in possession of one marijuana joint, right, that would have been considered possession of a drug for personal use. Under Proposition 47, prior to Proposition 47, and I would say 51 years ago, that was a felony, right? The fact that they never cleared that from your record, right? The fact that they never cleared that from your record, I would tell you to do this. To seek Proposition 47 relief, but also you can get expungement for that, outright expungement. That should be expunged from your record. I would tell you to connect with the public defender's office if you have something to write this down with, right? On Thursdays. And what county do you live in?
Cocoa.
Okay. Oh, you live in Cocoa County.
Yes,
okay.
Sir.
But where was the conviction out of? Do you remember?
I never went to trial or court or anything. I was arrested and released.
Oh, all right. So where was that at? Where did that happen at?
Richmond, Cocoa County.
Oh, okay. In Richmond, I don't particularly have that information on Richmond, but let's connect when the show is over, and I can tell you just some of the places where you can get this rolling at, because basically you could start your thing by going down to the Contra Costa County Public Defender's Office. Okay, and what you would want to do is ask to speak with their clean slate attorneys or Proposition 47 attorneys. Start there, and I believe that that thing that's on your record, they could have it expunged outright if there's nothing, because what they would do would probably put up what's called a live scan on you. You'd have to get a live scan to see basically.
I had two, and the second one, after I had it, that's what brought up this 51 years.
Wow. Okay, so I would start with the Contra Costa County Public Defender's Office and ask to speak to their clean slate attorneys.
Okay.
And find out. Yeah.
Thank you, my friend.
Hey, more than welcome.
All right.
Okay, that was good information right there. Let me see, man, that's heavy. So that just put something on my mind there. So it seems to me they've been doing this for so long. They've been lying to people's parents, saying it's all good and clean to put a documentation on a person's record. Just because they let him go, they still kept a record of this. That's real. Oh, that's scandalous. 51 years ago, for real? So I tell my people all the time, you got to watch these folks, okay? They are calculating everything in our life, and we cannot live day to day, check to check, but without thinking about our next steps. That's why I'm very, very calculating about what I do in my life now, because they're calculating more than we're calculating. So you don't have time to be messing around out here, just brainless, mindless, moving through life, because the moves we make are very calculated. That's key right there. One joint, and I believe if I'm not mistaken, it wasn't even smoking. It was just there. One joint in the area that he was at, and they put it on record 51 years ago, and it's still there. That's any white person would have had that happen. They would have wiped it out. It would have been on the record, no way, form, or fashion. But here we go, and it's like that makes me very, very angry. And what you were saying earlier, Brother Darius, about them, kind of like defeating us with the whole gun rights thing years ago by getting us in this mass incarceration thing. I didn't think of it like that. Yeah, I guess it's so many things to be bothered and focused on. But you're absolutely right. They were building this case back in the civil rights movement to kill generations of people to come who would not have gun rights to protect themselves in the event of some type of issue in the street. We'll be out here unarmed, unmanned, and jobless to feed our families. So not only can we not, let's just go back to the slavery mindset, okay? Let's just say back in the day, it was a mom and a dad and the kids, right? The father was in charge of providing for his family and protecting his family. So by putting him in prison, he lost income for the family. He also lost the rearing of his own children. He also lost his wife in a relationship and bond they had. And when he gets out, he can't get income, decent income to protect his family, to put food on the table. And now he can't even protect his family when now they have more powerful weapons on the street, and you can't even protect your own family against that. And let's just say on top of all of that, you move back to an area where it's just overrun with violence and gangs and shootings, and you can't even get to your little 2-bit job and back home not worried about fear for your life, for you and your children. And it's all started back a long time ago with castrating us economically and putting these little trumped up charges on us, for these drug charges. And not to even mention people who got caught up on drugs. We didn't even talk about them. It's heavy, man. It's very heavy.
Well, think about this, because I find this very interesting. Now, up until 1980, right? Around 1980, around that time, probably going back a little further when they really started ramping up this war on drugs. I'm not quite sure of the year they amended it. It was in the mid-'80s. But up until the mid-'80s in California, if you were convicted of a felony, you could not possess or own a handgun, but you can still possess and own a shotgun or a rifle. Think about it. Think about it. But then the law changed. And I would say it was around maybe 1983, 84, around that time, the law was changed to where you couldn't own or possess a firearm at all.
If I'm not mistaken, that's around the time where they put the assault weapons ban. The first one, the original one was in, I believe, 1984.
Yeah.
Because of the brothers who came in there. I don't know if it was brothers, but I think it was brothers who came in there and the armed robbery thing, and they had more weapons and artillery than the police. So they slapped that assault weapons ban with the AR-15 on there.
And it was around that time when California was at maybe 11 state prisons, and they blossomed into 28 state prisons. So this massive prison building, right? Now, keep this in mind. And this is what we have to be very, very, very articulate or be aware of. The prison population in California has fallen. What they say is violent crime and other crimes has began to fall. And so in this era of reducing the prison population, in the last gubernatorial budget, the governor set aside massive amounts of money to increase in prison building. Why is that? Why, when we're supposed to be reducing prisons, they're putting away money to build more prisons? It's something nefarious, it's sinister, right? What does this mean? You know, it has been verified and pointed out that we forecast our prison populations based upon an individual's ability to be able to read by 3rd grade.
I can tell you, my theory on this is this. they know the problems they're giving us in our community. And although a lot of our people are still sleeping and they're thinking it's going to get better and they're hoping and wishing, if they put that in place already, they already projected the numbers. They know we don't have good jobs. They know 70% of our sisters don't have a man at home with their kids. They know this is going to produce young adults who are going to be prone to go and get into the street game because no father to stay on their head. So they projecting this to fill the prisons with our future kids again. So they went from the civil rights movement right out of slavery and getting civil rights. They put the trumped up drug charges on them people, as well as getting them caught in the drug game after come out of the war. So they messed up the two generations from there, 2 or 3 generations. Now they're getting ready to get the next grandkids with these new prison and jail bills, because they know, I look at it like this: we're being gentrified into the prison system. We're gentrified back into the jail system. So well, everybody's moving into areas we grew up and we built. They're moving our people into the prisons, in the jail that they're getting ready to build. So those who end up staying in an area where they can't sustain themselves, here's the problem we have. And it's real sad, but everybody's not really willing to wake up on that. And that's where we're at. And I just feel like, I don't know how else to wake people who just don't want to wake up in, because they're going to wake up in a world of hurt. Ain't going to be no answers for them. Ain't going to be no jobs for them. So while we still have some money, we can put our money together and help save a few of us.
Well,
yeah, go ahead, bro.
And if I can say this.
Yeah.
And I think one of the problems that we're dealing here, right here in the Bay Area and throughout California, is this. There's a lot of good brothers and sisters that have come home from prison, right? Intent on rebuilding their lives, trying to do things to rebuild their communities, right? But you remember, just like Jim Crow, once they were let out of slavery, Jim Crow laws restricted them from doing certain things. As a matter of fact, some of the laws that were created out of Jim Crow, if a person, vagrancy laws were created, right? Okay, most black people, when they were let go out of slavery, they had nowhere to go, so they created these vagrancy laws. Those laws were basically designed to put them, they were back in prison, and then they were convict leased out to the same plantations that they were freed from, right? And so what I'm trying to equate that with, if you let a person out of incarceration who have paid their debt to society, but because of housing restrictions, they can't get housing, up until 2015, right? A person, if they were convicted of a drug offense, right? When they came home, they could not get the basic food card, right? But thanks to one of our stalwart legislatures, and I respect, we have some good people on the fight regardless, because her name is Nancy Skinner. She saw the need and this great burden that it was placed upon our folks. So she had that measure. She passed the bill, and that measure was lifted out. You could now get that food card, but prior to that, you could not get it. If you wanted to go back to community college to pursue a trade or a craft, if you were convicted of a drug offense, you could not get the basic Pell Grant to go back to school. So you think about these things. All these things were designed to perpetually keep you incarcerated. So if you were intent on doing right when you got out and you start facing these insurmountable barriers, right, then the law of averages says, there's a thing in, in psychology, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? A person is going to take care of those needs, anybody, they're going to do by any means necessary. So when you create these barriers, right? When you create these barriers, it's akin to letting a person out of slavery with no resources and then creating barriers and laws so you can pick them back up and send them right back to the plantation, right?
That's right.
So that's what we're looking at today.
And I was gonna do a show broadcast on that very thing, Maslow hierarchy of needs, because this is how I see the timeline of where we are right now. A lot of folks don't want to really admit that we in this timeline to where we're going to have to fight for our survival here in a more direct fight physically. that they don't want to see that until the food is taken off the table. Then you're gonna feel it in a whole another way. And I'm trying my best to wake some of these Negroes up because they don't see it, to see the forest for the trees. And Maslow hierarchy of needs, if you look at the pyramid structure, it's a pyramid structure. I used to have it platted on my wall. And at the top of the pyramid is the highest peak of successful living. But we're so far at the bottom. We're at the very base layer right now. And after the base layer, that's direct, basic, primal survival. Once that drops off, people are gonna be worried to go to war in the street because they ain't got nothing to lose no more. And that's where we are right now. I got Natasha with her hand up again. Let me, Natasha.
Sorry, I do have a couple of things I wanted to say. First, I wanted to say thank you for the literature that you mentioned and the documentaries. I'm definitely going to check those out. So just to be, I just want to make sure this is what you said. So somebody with a felony, or is it any specific felony, can get a passport? And is it any passport? Is it land, or is it, air?
Yes, if you have a felony, you can get a passport. Now, I understand there's some countries that if you have a felony, that will prevent you from traveling to that country. Like, I believe Canada is one of them. But for the most part, with a felony, you can get a passport. As long as you're not on any type of paper, if you're not on state,
like parole or probation or something,
that restricts you from traveling, you can't get a passport.
Okay. Oh, okay, I see. And also, you had mentioned something about how it's a lot easier for a white man to get a job than it is for a black man.
Yes.
Okay. I just wanted to touch on something just a little bit. I mean, and it definitely more than likely starts from groups such as this one. But if we were in a better position as a people, and can start from us, I'm pretty sure there's a lot of black people with their own businesses. But, hiring our own people, because I've seen many black businesses that don't hire their own people, in those situations that, it could, that, I feel like that's one way that can change, is if we're hiring our own people. And that's really all I really want to say.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I've come to the conclusion that we have to start really looking to do. We have to get back to self-sustainment, right? And one of the ways, instead of, it's one thing to go out and beg for jobs, right? And another thing for us to start like creating our jobs. I think it was about this time last year, we were in this campaign to bring jobs to Alameda County for formerly incarcerated individuals, for the county to start hiring individuals with felony records to take the lead. And we called the program 1,400 Jobs for Freedom. The Board of Supervisors in June of 2016 overwhelmingly passed that initiative, and they said that they would hire formerly incarcerated people in county jobs, a significant amount of numbers. There was one lady, she came and she talked to our group about, it's one thing to fight these people for jobs, but the other thing for us to start creating our own business models. But I think what's really happened with our mindset, as African-American peoples, most of us, we are still kind of like drunk off of their wine, right? And what I mean by that is that we can't no longer fathom, right? Constructing or having our own. I think, we are drunk off this, what Dr. Umar Johnson calls the illusion of inclusion, right? We are still fighting to be included, right? With this illusion that we can, instead of like, you know, really, really building a home. And so we have to ask ourselves, where does that come from, right? And so, you know, it's my opinion, and it's just my own opinion, no basic fact attached to it, although I can maybe quote to some research. But I do think that when you have been harmed in certain ways, that trauma tends to stick with you. So I think, you know, people have passed down from generation to generation that when we did have our own, when we were surviving, when we were doing better than white folks during the Great Depression, because we had our own economies. We talk about Tulsa, Oklahoma, the Black Wall Street. That was just one. That was just one. There were many like that, right? But when you look what happened, I think people tend to look back at those things, and those of us who do have the capital to invest in our own businesses and everything, we kind of we get drunk off the wine. We say, well, you know, we'd rather do illusion of inclusion rather than have our own, you know.
You know, I got something to say on that. I just, man, listen, I'm to the point, I'm like this. I'm real militant about this. And I'm like, you know what you said was absolutely true. It's to the point where they have been, this is the sad part. It's like having a rape victim who wants to go back and sleep with the one who's been raping her for 10, 15 years. It's amazing that our people will be okay with it. I know this person raped me for 20, 30, 40 years, but they now protect me because I ain't got to go outside and get raped by somebody else. So I'll stay here in the house with this person and let them rape me once or twice a week and not every day no more. You see, this is how it feels. And I'm like this. People who don't want to put their money where their mouth is, I don't like to hear them complain. I just don't. People want to complain about things being really bad, but they don't want to put no money up to change it. I really don't have no ear to hear what they're saying. They're not investing with their own money into something that's going to make things happen for them and their families and their future. They're not putting their personal time to combat the cause like you doing, Brother Darius. It's like you spend your time to be on the call. I spend my time on the call. People on the call spend time to be on the call to discuss these issues and be aware and be in the know of what's going on in our community. We go out and we spend time with other people who are maybe don't listen to what we got to say. And my thing is this: if you're not putting no effort for your own future, then you need to be raped by people who are willing to rape you back and forth. But don't complain to other people in your own community who's trying to do a better thing. And that's just kind of where I'm at. I got Marsh hands up right now. Let me get Marsh, and I know he got a lot to say. All right, Marsh, unmute it.
Yeah, Wolf, you get excited about that, and I understand that completely, my brother, because that's what it is. But Brother Darius, I want to go back to something that you said that I have said over and over and over and over again. All issues end up being local issues, and with them being local issues, we actually, if we come together, just like you said, if the brothers in Alameda or Contra Costa County realize that this felon is gone and you can get it off and you can go and you can vote, that we can vote in individuals that are there for our cause, even if it's us ourselves that get out there and start doing that. A lot of people tell me, don't go vote, they're going to do what they want to do. Yeah, they're going to do what they want to do as long as we're there. They did what they wanted to do when the Panthers came out and stood on the steps at the Capitol with shotguns and rifles right there, which precipitated all of this movement to where we are right now, except for the brothers that had more firepower than the police, which came back to the automatic weapons and so forth. But if we don't vote, or actually, we got to vote. Somebody got to get out there and vote. Me personally, at this point, I think that it's time to leave America, or to get out of the matrix totally. That's almost 70 years of age. I got to go. It doesn't make sense to sit here anymore with what Sean just said. Everybody talking and giving you lip service, and they're not doing anything about it. You're out there organizing. I organized for years and years, and we're trying to organize them again right now. But you quoted one of my favorite things from Dr. Umar just moments ago. And that, I totally agree with you, is the problem that is associated with most individuals, in my humble opinion, from about 45 down. Most of them, especially the 30s and the 20s, they have no idea of what goes on around them, and they all look for the 1st and the 15th, and they stop giving them money, and they start giving them a card where they can track them. You can't tell them that they're being tracked, but they won't listen to you. Why? Wisdom at one time in the village came from those of us that got a little gray around them, around their beard, and the youngsters listen. That's not happening anymore. I guess I'm going to ask you, what is it that you think we can do to strengthen ourselves in our day-to-day conversations with these young folks out here? What can we do to strengthen that? Because I have been out, I get up in the morning, go get my coffee at the gas station, and I done had the little girl was in there and they were cussing GD this, GD that. I don't give a GD, I don't give a GD. And it just hit me in the top of my head, and I couldn't stand it no more. And I started hollering, is this a GD? Is this, is this, and this? Because everything was MF, a GD, MF to them. Everything. I mean, everything. And all the rest of the youngsters shut up and listened to the one was talking, and she ended up backing up after she said she don't know me like that. But I don't know. I guess I don't know how to go reach and touch them anymore. I don't know what to say to get in that mindset. You out there, and perhaps you know something that I don't know.
Well, this is what I come to understand. A lot of our young people suffer from what's called vacant esteem, right? And vacant esteem means that they feel that they have no worth to their family nor to their community, right? That's vacant esteem, right? And a lot of that comes down from years and generations of what Dr. Joy DeGruy calls, if you're familiar with her, post-traumatic slave syndrome. Mm-hmm. I think that we have to remember this. In any war, there's casualties of war.
Yep.
So they declared war on us with the war on drugs. Those are war on our community. So if you look at generations that we're looking at now, of the young people that you have come in contact with, they're not being raised by mothers. They're not even being raised by grandmothers. They're being raised by great-great-grandmothers, because our villages have been habitually burned down. So I think that we can't approach them in condescending ways that points out their flaws or the language, because they're going to be that way. But you have to meet them where they are, right? Just meet them where they are, because you're not going to be able to tell them about the Black Panther Party or people because half of them, they don't know, because they've never been taught it in school. Schools don't teach it, and they're not learning it at home. Everything that they know has been passed down to them from MTV now. I don't know what it is now, right? MTV was years ago, right? They got this new wave stuff now. And so that's what they know. And so the only way that you're going to open up a conversation with them, right, is to catch their attention, catch their mind. You're not going to be able to do it by pointing out the way that they dress or the way that a person speaks, but you're going to be able to do it by just saying, what's going on? What's up, right? And then from there, we start developing maybe places where they can go, where they can hang out, and then they began to hear what we have to say. Because a lot of times, they're just mimicking the things that they have seen or been reared in. And so what you're looking at is a reflection of the parental environment of which they have grown up in.
I understand you. I hear you. I'm going to try that. Thank you.
All right, bro. We got about maybe, 10 more minutes. CJ got a question, so I'm gonna unmute CJ. CJ, go ahead and ask your question, bro. We got about 10 minutes.
Yes, sir. And so I just wanted to also make a couple comments, because what you guys were just saying about the youngsters, it's so hard to reach them because of things like Empire and Facebook and Snapchat. I mean, this is where they're at. This is where they're at. And I mean, I agree with him. I just don't know how to break in. I don't know how to get to these youngsters. I wanted to say something else about prisons. I didn't hear you, Darius. I didn't hear you mention anything about the private prison system. And the way I see it, this is how I see it. I mean, it's a cold hustle. They are making big money, and I see it. What do I see it as? I see it as slavery all over again. That's what I see it as. And to break this system, to break this chain, to break it, I mean, we're going to have to start, like you guys saying, hiring each other, looking out for each other. We'll have to figure out a way to get to these kids. I mean, it's something it's got to be done.
It was noted that the day after number 45 was elected, stock in the private prison industry went up tenfold. So yeah, it's planning for the future. I mean, they learned a lesson in that they could not lock people up the way they were locking them up and not basically hurt themselves. So the way they do it now, looking forward to do it now, is through the private prison industry. And yes, it's moving fast and furious, right? If a person is buying stock in the private prison industry, then they're not, states and the federal government, they aren't, paying for it. And so that's going to be the next wave. And I think, people need to begin to prepare for that, right? And so the only way that, I look at it like this, right? Yes, there's been a lot of laws recently that has been passed, criminal justice reform laws. I talked about Proposition 47 was just one of them, right? But my thing is this: the prison industrial complex to me is one big warehouse, and you keep a warehouse making money if you keep products on the shelf. So if our communities are still producing the product that's going to end up on the shelf, right? Then we need to rethink that, right? We need to get back into those things. We need to get back to practicing in our indigenous practices, things like the way we did healing circles. I say that it starts with families. And I find it ironic. I'll leave you with this thought. I was doing some like deep soul searching and thinking about, just how times changed and stuff like that. And it takes me back to about 1977, 76. There had become by that time it was this really low in the civil rights movement. Most of the revolutionary groups had been, broken up, imprisoned and scattered, and so we got into like this disconnect. Families were disconnecting, but then around 76, some of our songs that we began to sing, Harold Melvin Blue Notes, Wake Up Everybody, No More Sleeping in Bed, those songs began to play out. A year later, the OJs start talking about family reunions, and you see this kind of air of like, okay, let's quit sleeping, let's reconstruct ourselves. Then in January of 1977, if you remember, the movie Roots came out, and that was the first time, that I had seen, the power of Black families fighting back. I remember that scene of, Chicken George when he told the slave master, if you touch me in mine again, I'm going to kill you, right? So it created a air of strength. It created, and so it was no coincidence that shortly after that, about a year or two after that, all these drugs and stuff start creeping up in our community. Think about that.
Yeah, you know, it's funny you say that. My favorite series back in the day was Shaka Zulu. That was my dude. Shaka Zulu. Yeah, you know, Roots was kind of pissed me off, but you know, people don't understand, man. We probably need to do a show on that too because TV programming is very powerful. It works both. It's like a two-edged sword. It works both ways. One way, it empowers us for to feel some type of way about ourselves, and if it's good programming. But the other way, it makes them fear us. You see, they saw that program, saw people fighting back, and like, whoa, we gotta do something with these Negroes. Let's put some cocaine or something in the neighborhood. In the 80s, man, it was heavy, man, out here in East Oakland. It was heavy with the crack cocaine epidemic and whatnot, and heroin.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was very heavy. We got about 4 minutes left, family. Go ahead, Brother Darius, you got any last words? Any you want anybody to keep up with you? You want to send your email address if I want to ask you some questions or whatever? Go ahead and do that, my brother.
Okay. I would say this, right? We don't need to be a part of an organization or nonprofit to organize in our communities. As a matter of fact, they're as big as much pimps in the game as everybody else. Right?
Agreed. I agree.
So if you live in your neighborhood, right? And I've said this once and I'll say it again. What keeps you from maybe just going out to the youngsters, right? Starting a book club. Maybe if you get 2 in your house, just start reading a book. That might translate into 3. That might translate into 4. Then all of a sudden you organize it, you see, because you've got their interest. If you got a DVD player, how many of these young people that we know of have seen any of the Hidden Color documentaries, right? Invite them into your house and break down Hidden Colors. Right? Let them see 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then that starts to kind of like fertilize the mind, because I tell you like this, right? Learning, it's a narcotic within itself, right? Self-knowledge. If you get young people into that self-knowledge, it's a narcotic within itself. And it builds on the mind. It builds on aspirations. And you can do a whole lot, and they become dangerous minds. Just think about that.
You're absolutely right, my brother. I was thinking about what you just said. I remember coming up, we could go over our friend's house, or some people who didn't have a father in the home, somebody's uncle or somebody's big cousin and whatnot. And he took us under their wing. They would show people and, come out, hang out with them for a minute. And you had great respect for them when they spend time with you. And even when you got older, that person was much older than you. You still came by to see him. Remember those good times. Because I was that dude looking out for the young people coming up in the village, 99 Village back in the day. But when I was coming up early on, I had a father in the house, but we had our issues. But some people who didn't have that role model, you follow me, from the block. And there's always somebody in the block that would take them over their wing, play some ball with them, and talk to them about life stuff. So they didn't have no man at home. And I tell you today, that made a lot of the young brothers better individuals. It kept a lot of them from going to prison, getting caught up in the game. Somebody made some mistakes and maybe went to jail or prison for a short term, but they bounced back because they had something to draw back from. So what you're saying is very important. That's why I want to, at some point, I want to do a park event so we can show like Hidden Colors and whatnot. I got all the equipment we need to have an event out there in the park, so we can kind of educate our young folks by not being direct, like you said, condescending to them, but giving them some kind of way they can speak and feel like they got something we can build a community with. It's gonna take some time. We got 1 minute left. Well, 6 minutes left. Go ahead, bro. You want to leave your email or something? You want to keep up with you, and how can it connect with you on maybe social media or something?
If you want to email me, you can email me at young, that's YUNG, Darris, DARRIS, at yahoo.com. Okay. And you could also send me messages, because I do check the messages that come through Bay Area Black.
Yeah. Okay. So basically you hit us up at Bay Area Black at gmail.com, and I always forward my brother contact information and whatever questions somebody may have for him. You can always reach me at that too. You can go to our website, www.bayareablack.org. and you can click contact us, and we can get in touch with you and give you the feedback that you need. Well, brother, it's been real, my brother. I appreciate the time you spent with us. I knew I had to put it for about 1 hour and 45 because we're going to need that time for the questions and whatnot. It worked out pretty good, though, bro. It worked out pretty good. For those who didn't make on the call, they'll have the actual time to put it on when they hear from YouTube, the rebroadcast. Make sure you like us on YouTube at The Bay Area Black Community. And we like us on Twitter at Bay Area Black. It's a protected tweet, so I got to make sure you who are you or say you are. And follow us on Facebook. Like us on Facebook, The Bay Area Black Community. And that's going to be a wrap, my brother.